This is the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked Jesus privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. A little over 10 years ago, back when I was an intern preparing to become a pastor, I was assigned to a church in Yorktown, Virginia, kind of along the coast in Virginia, maybe an hour south of Washington, D.C. And that summer, one of my jobs was to take our confirmation class, 7th and 8th graders, up for a trip to New York City. We're going to go up to New York City and stay at a church on the Upper East Side that had a food bank. The plan was we're going to work in the food bank every morning, helping to serve meals to folks in New York. And then in the afternoons, we get to kind of go off and do our sightseeing, touristy stuff. And so we packed up. There was a couple other adults with me and our small group of kids, and we took the train because it's the East Coast and that seemed like a convenient way to get there. We took the train all the way up to New York City, and we get in, we find our way to Grand Central Station and start heading our way towards the church we're going to stay at. And I remember almost immediately being so surprised that all of these kids that were with us, these middle schoolers, had never been in the city before. They lived less than an hour from Washington, D.C., but other than a few school trips, hadn't really experienced what it means to be out and about in a city. And so as soon as we kind of stepped out into the streets, all of them immediately were just looking up, staring at all the huge skyscrapers, just being in awe of everything that New York City is. And it took a little bit of work to get them to, stay off to the side and not block the sidewalk and keep things moving. And then we get into the subway system, and they're trying to figure out which train to get on, and some of them are trying to get on the train right now, and others still aren't ready yet, and had to remind them all that they have to hold on when the train starts, otherwise they're going to fall over backwards. It was really surprising to me, because I'd been in a few different cities, just how differently we saw the world around us when we got into a place like New York City. I was focused on getting us onto the right stop on the subway and into the right place heading towards the church, and all of these kids were just stuck looking up in awe of what they saw around them. It made things a little difficult as we made our journey there, but we all made it. We all got to the place we needed to go. But as I was reading through this gospel story, I couldn't help to be reminded of that, because I think that Jesus might have felt the same sort of way. Here they are, in Jerusalem, the place where Jesus' mission is going to be accomplished on earth. He's got a goal in mind. He has a place to go. He is getting focused in. And Jesus' disciples, who probably in actual history would only be a few years older than the middle schoolers I took to New York City, they're stuck just wandering around like tourists, looking up at the big buildings, just in awe of them all. Probably blocking the sidewalk for someone trying to move their falafel cart on the way through, kind of bumbling around. And it struck me that there's this distinct difference that comes up between the way Jesus sees the world and the way Jesus' disciples see the world. These visions are in conflict with each other almost through the entire set of Gospels. Jesus has a particular focus, almost laser-like, on what comes next, on what God is doing, on where God is calling Jesus to be. And the disciples, like so many of us, are distracted by whatever is around them. They're just kind of bumbling their way through, trying to figure out what Jesus might want them to do. And most of the time, not seeing it. I think this is interesting because if you look back through the stories of the Gospels, you can see those few moments where Jesus' vision of the world matches up with the way the disciples see the world. It doesn't happen much, but those moments where it happens are truly amazing and miraculous. You see, when Jesus looks at the world, he sees those who are hungry and finds a way to feed them, even if it seems like there's only a little bit of bread and fish around. When Jesus sees the world, he sees those people who are calling out for healing. When Jesus sees the world, he knows that death is not the end and raises up even those who are dead. When Jesus sees the world, Jesus knows that nothing is impossible and amazing things happen. And sometimes the disciples are able to come along on that journey. Sometimes the disciples are able to see these miracles with their own eyes. Sometimes the disciples can even take a step out onto water and find solid ground. But sometimes they can't. This entire kind of ministry of Jesus throughout the Gospels is about trying to pull more and more people along into this vision, into this way of seeing the world the way God sees the world. And I think that's what we try and do today. That's what we try and do as the church. In our confirmation classes and in our younger grades, sometimes we talk about what is the church. And the first thing we say is the church is not a building. It's a group of people. But I think my favorite metaphor for the church is more than just that. It's that the church is not a building, but the church is like a pair of glasses. The church is like a pair of glasses because when we become a part of the church, when we work together as a church, we are changing the way we see the world around us. We are putting on a pair of glasses to see the world a little more clearly, to see the world a little more like how God sees the world. Each of us as members of a church are, in fact, amateur optometrists in a way, putting on these pair of glasses that help us to see a little more like Jesus and twiddling the knobs and adjusting the prescription to see if we can get that clear picture, to see if we can get that vision of the world the way God sees it. Putting on this pair of glasses that is the church means looking out at the world and seeing different things. We can look out at the world and we see not just a pandemic that's already killed millions of people, but the miracle of vaccines and treatments that are saving lives. We can look out at the world and we can see more than just folks who have been incredibly lonely or distant for the last 18 months, but we can see all the ways that we have found to pull together, to connect online through online worship, to make phone calls, to send cards. And it's much more than just looking on the bright side of things. We can look out at the world. We can see someone who is struggling in grief, and we cannot be afraid. We can go and we can be with someone even if we don't know what to say, maybe especially if we don't know what to say. Putting on these glasses of the church, learning to see the world the way Jesus does, is not easy. But it changes the way we see the world. It changes the way we act and participate in the world around us. This is what Jesus is calling us to do. To look out at our world today and to try and see it through Jesus' eyes. It's not easy. We're not always going to get it right. Certainly, as the church, there have been plenty of times when we've tuned that prescription the wrong direction, when things have gotten much more fuzzy instead of more clear, and when we've gotten a headache. But the amazing thing about this pair of glasses that we call the church, the amazing thing about God's people gathered together, is that sometimes we get our job right. Sometimes we actually manage to do what Jesus has called us to do. Sometimes we manage to see the world through Jesus' eyes. And that glimpse of the world, no matter how short it may be, that glimpse of the world as God sees it, changes our hearts. It changes the course of our lives. It sends us out to love and care for people in a way we never thought we could before. It helps us to see those who are different from us, who might live on the other side of the railroad tracks or on the other side of the world. Helps us to see that we are all God's children. It helps us to see ourselves and to know that we are called to use all of us, our time, our talents, our money, to care for the world that God has made. Seeing the world the way Jesus sees it, through Jesus' eyes, it changes us. It might change the course of our careers. It might change what we are working for. These moments are powerful. To see the world the way God does is not an easy thing. It might convict us, it might challenge us, it might make us uncomfortable. But each and every time we do, each and every time we get that prescription tuned in just the right way, we see what God is doing right here and right now. We get a chance to see the face of Jesus in a person or place we never expected. We get to see ourselves as God's hands, God's heart, God's voice in the world. We're not always going to get it right. But in those moments when we do, we are a part of something more than we can ever imagine. We get to make that vision that Jesus brought into the world, that vision that God is still creating here and now, a part of our reality, a part of the world right here. We are called, as followers of Jesus, to take that vision, that image of the world as God is making it, and letting us see it and letting us make it real right here and now. This is what Jesus calls the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven. And we often think of it as what happens after we die. That's where we go. We go to heaven, we go to God's kingdom. But when Jesus talks about that, Jesus is talking about something that can happen here and now. This is what it means to look through Jesus' eyes, to see the world the way God does. It's not easy, but just one glimpse, no matter how short, can change our hearts and can change our lives. No matter where you are today, no matter where your week may take you, my hope and prayer is that you catch just a small glimpse of what God is doing here and now. One small glimpse of your world through Jesus' eyes. And may you never be the same. Amen.